I could be grateful every day, because without the opiates, high doses of them, people would die in agony. But with the opiates, we can make them very comfortable. By the way, let me shatter a myth around addiction. This whole idea that drugs are addictive, they're not in themselves addictive. I gave high quantities of opiates to people when I needed to, with terminal illness. But then if we found another way, let's say somebody had severe back pain because of a tumor deposit in their spine. So they needed sometimes, 1,000, 2,000 milligrams of morphine a day. That's a huge amount. 5 milligrams every 4 hours is what you get if you break your leg. 30 milligrams a day. I was giving multiples of that number. But then if you give that person a nerve block and the pain goes away, very quickly we could get them off their opiates and they were not addicted to it. And large-scale studies have shown that a lot of people can be given opiates for pain and they don't become addicted. Which means that the drugs in themselves are not addictive, are they? Now, let me ask you a question. Is alcohol addictive? Raise your hands if you think it is. Is alcohol addictive? Yeah? I know you're hesitating, right? Because... Well, it's not addictive, obviously, because raise your hand if you ever had a glass of wine in your life, or beer, okay? Now, keep your hand up if you had an alcohol problem in your life. Well, if it was addictive, you should all be alcohol addicts. In other words, no drug, no substance in itself is addictive. Most people who try most substances, even repeatedly, never become addicted to it. So you can talk about these highly addictive drugs like crack and crystal meth and all that. The vast majority of people who try them never become addicted to them. So we have to actually, when asked the question, is alcohol addictive, yes or no? You know what the answer is? Yes or no. That's what the answer is. When you ask, is shopping addictive, yes or no, the answer is yes or no. Is food addictive, yes or no? Is sexual acting out addictive, yes or no? The answer is yes or no. What we have to look at are the susceptibilities. What makes people prone to be addicted? Because the substance itself doesn't explain it. And therefore, to put the emphasis on simply trying to stop the flow of drugs, as if that's ever made any difference whatsoever, is by definition to waste a lot of resources and to create a lot of unnecessary pain. But that's not where the answer is. So, the opiates, pain relief. But here's what you have to understand. They don't only relieve physical pain, they also relieve emotional pain. It turns out that the same part of the brain that experiences the suffering of physical pain also experiences the suffering of social rejection, for example. The sources and pathways of the pain are different, but the suffering is experienced in the same part of the brain where opiate receptors are abundantly present. And if you look at alcohol, it's a pain reliever. In fact, the old saying, when somebody drank too much, they used to say, he's feeling no pain. Cocaine is a local anesthetic, it numbs nerve endings. Cannabis has pain-relieving qualities, as we are beginning to find out. All the behaviors of addiction, whether they're substance-related or not, either directly soothe pain, emotional pain, or they distract from it. So, my mantra, and if there's nothing else you remember from the day, is simply this. The first question in addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And if you want to understand why people have pain, you got to look at their lives, not at their genes, not at their choices, but what actually happened to them. Well, why is it that the opiates even work in the human brain? I mean, it's a plant. Opium grows in Asia. Why is it so effective in our bodies, in our brains? Well, for the simple reason, as many of you know, that we have receptors for them. Now, receptors are molecules on the surfaces of our cells that can receive a messenger molecule. So hormones are messenger molecules, opiates are messenger molecules, cocaine is a messenger molecule, and for the messenger to work, there has to be somebody to receive the message. You know, it's like you send a message out there, but there's no receiver, nobody's going to hear it. Well, we have receptors for tens of thousands of substances on every cell in our body, in the cell membrane. Tens of thousands of receptors, including we have opiate receptors. Now, why do we have receptors for a plant product that comes from Asia? Well, of course, as again many of you know, the answer is that we don't. What we have receptors for are our own endogenous opiate-like substances, which are called endorphins. An endorphin simply means endogenous morphine-like substance. So the question is, so we have an endorphin system. Why do we have an endorphin system? Just so that we can get high on a Saturday night? Surely not. So nature is very efficient that way. It'll use the same substance for many different purposes. And so the endorphin system has many different roles. For example, if you have traveler's diarrhea, you're going to get an opiate because it slows the bowel down. Because the bowel has, the intestines have opiate receptors which help to modulate the motility of the bowel. If you go through opiate withdrawal, you'll have diarrhea for the same reason. So the opiates are active throughout the system, and they have multiple different roles. But in the brain, they have three major functions, which are crucial to understanding addictions. First, they relieve pain, physical and emotional pain. That's obvious, we've already talked about it. Pain, of course, is important in life, because without pain, we just can't function. But also with too much pain, we can also not function. So we have to have pain relief. That's their first role. Their second role is that euphoria that you mentioned, that sense of pleasure and reward. It's the endorphins in abundance that give us that euphoric state, pleasure and a sense of reward. That's their second function. Their third function is the most important, the least appreciated. They actually make possible a dynamic without which human life is actually impossible. They are attachment chemicals. By attachment chemicals, I mean attachment between two human beings. Attachment is the drive to be close to somebody for the purpose of being taken care of, or for the purpose of taking care of the other. That's the fundamental role of attachment. It's not the only role, but it's the fundamental one. The reason it's the fundamental one, because the human infant is the most helpless, the most dependent, the least mature, the most vulnerable of any creature in the universe, and stays that way for the longest period of time compared to any other animal. So attachment relationships are actually the key dynamic in human life. Without attachment, there just is no life. Infant mice in the laboratory, when their endorphin receptors are knocked out genetically, so they have no endorphin activity, will not cry for their mothers on separation. Now, what would that mean in the wild state? It would mean their death. If they're isolated from mother and they don't call for mom, they're dead. So the endorphins are actually necessary for the very basic nurturing relationships in human life. Now, consider for a moment a human being who, for reasons we'll look at, comes to the conclusion, implicit conclusion, that without this particular chemical, I will not have a sense of pain relief, pleasure reward, or connection. How are you going to take that away from them? You're going to put a sign on the wall? Just say no. Just say no to pain relief. Say no to pleasure and reward. Say no to a sense of belonging and connection. A sex trade worker in Vancouver told me that the first time she did heroin, it felt like a warm, soft hug. She was encapsulating the biophysiology of addiction in that one sentence. That's the opiates. Now I mentioned the stimulants. The stimulants elevate dopamine levels. By the way, it's not like the opiates only elevate dopamine levels or only elevate endorphin levels. All the substances and all the behaviors of addiction go through the pleasure pathways, the pain relief pathways. They also go through the dopamine pathways. So you mustn't see them as strict divisions. I'm talking about the predominant effect. But really, all behaviors of addiction engage the same brain circuits as well, without any external substances. And all substances will trigger the dopamine and the endorphin and so on. But the stimulants primarily or most directly elevate dopamine levels. Now dopamine is another crucial brain chemical without which life is not possible. Because dopamine is the incentive motivation chemical. So without flow of dopamine, we're inert, inactive, lifeless, unmotivated, which means we don't live. So dopamine flows whenever you're exploring a novel object or a novel environment. Now think of the importance of dopamine in human evolution. Exploring novel objects, novel environments. Look at children when they begin life. They're full of dopamine activity. Exploring novel objects, they will put the whole world in their mouths. Novel environments. Dopamine flows when you're seeking food. Dopamine flows when you're seeking a sexual partner. So I got news for you. Sex addiction, for example, is not about sex, is it? It's about the seeking, isn't it? Because if it was about sex, all one sex addict would have to do is to find another one and be a partner for the rest of their lives. And I'm not making fun of the condition, it's very serious. But really, if sex was the issue, then sex would be the solution. But it isn't. It's that seeking, it's the hunt, it's the thrill, it's the getting the next one. As soon as you have this one, you need to go on to another one. Like with any addict, any addiction. Because that's where the dopamine comes from. So in my own shopping addiction days, it wasn't the objects that I was looking for. I didn't need any more of them. And as soon as I had one, I needed another one. It's not that I needed another one. I needed to have the experience of being excited and motivated and alive that the dopamine flow gave me. And I was never a substance addict, but I was a dopamine addict for sure. So imagine a human being then who comes to the conclusion, implicitly, that without this substance, I won't feel alive, motivated, excited, vital. How are you going to take that away from them? Make it illegal? Forbid it? Talk them out of it? Good luck.